Have you ever found yourself wondering who you truly are beneath all the layers of expectations, judgments, and societal pressures? That moment when you catch a glimpse of your reflection and barely recognize the person staring back at you? There's a profound disconnect many of us experience, a feeling that we're living our lives wearing masks, carefully crafted personas that we present to the world while our authentic selves remain hidden, even from our own awareness. This experience is more universal than you might think. We walk through life with a smile plastered on our face, nodding and agreeing, all while a storm of unexpressed thoughts and feelings rages within. It's as if we're living in a house of mirrors, constantly adjusting our image to fit what we believe others want to see. I understand this feeling deeply, the exhaustion that comes from maintaining these facades, the quiet desperation of longing to be truly seen and accepted for who you really are. The pain of this disconnection manifests in so many ways. The anxiety that gnaws at you when you're about to express an opinion that might not be popular, the emptiness that follows after social interactions where you've played your part perfectly but feel no genuine connection, the growing sense that your life is slipping by without you ever having truly lived it authentically. This suffering is real, but it doesn't have to be permanent. There is a way to bridge the gap between the person you present to the world and the person you truly are, a path toward wholeness and genuine self-acceptance that doesn't require you to become someone new, but rather to uncover who you've always been beneath the layers of protection and adaptation. Today, we're going to explore this path through the compassionate wisdom of one of psychology's most influential humanists, Carl Rogers. His approach offers not just theory, but practical steps toward authentic living that have transformed countless lives, and they can transform yours too. At the core of Carl Rogers' revolutionary approach to psychology is a profound belief in the inherent worth and potential of every human being. Unlike many of his predecessors who viewed humans as fundamentally flawed or driven by unconscious destructive impulses, Rogers held a deeply optimistic view of human nature. He proposed that we are all born with what he called an actualizing tendency, an innate drive toward growth, fulfillment, and self-actualization. This tendency is like a seed containing all the potential of what it might become, naturally oriented towards sunlight, nourishment, and the conditions that will allow it to flourish. Consider how a plant naturally grows toward the light, how it knows intuitively how to direct its energy to thrive, even when conditions aren't ideal. Similarly, Rogers believed that humans naturally move toward wholeness and integration when the right conditions are present. This doesn't mean that we're all destined for perfection or that suffering doesn't exist. Rather, it suggests that our natural trajectory is towards psychological health, creativity, and meaningful connection with others. When this movement is blocked or distorted, it's not because of some inherent flaw in our nature, but because our environment has not provided the conditions necessary for our growth. This perspective represents a radical shift from pathologizing human struggles to understanding them as natural responses to environments that haven't met our fundamental needs for acceptance, understanding, and genuine connection. Rogers developed his approach through decades of deeply attentive work with clients, noticing patterns in what helped people heal and grow. What emerged was a beautifully simple yet profound understanding of the three core conditions necessary for psychological growth. The first of these conditions is what Rogers called unconditional positive regard, a deep and genuine acceptance of a person exactly as they are, without judgment or conditions. This isn't about approving of every behavior or agreeing with every perspective. Rather, it's about separating the worth of the person from their actions or beliefs. When someone experiences being valued in this way, something remarkable begins to happen. They start to lower their defenses and explore parts of themselves they've kept hidden, even from their own awareness. The second condition is empathic understanding, the ability to enter deeply into another person's subjective world, to sense their feelings and perceptions as if they were your own, while maintaining the awareness that they belong to the other person. This form of understanding goes beyond intellectual comprehension to a felt sense of walking alongside someone in their experience. When we feel truly understood at this level, it validates our experience and helps us make sense of our own feelings and reactions. The third condition is congruence or authenticity, the genuine presence of the helper or loved one, without professional facades or pretense. This authenticity creates safety and models the very quality that supports healing and growth. What makes Roger's approach so powerful is that these aren't just theoretical concepts, but practical conditions that can be cultivated in any relationship. When these conditions are present, whether in therapy, a close friendship, a romantic partnership, or even in our relationship with ourselves, they create an environment where genuine growth and transformation become possible. Think about a time when you felt truly accepted by someone, when you could share your thoughts and feelings without fear of judgment or rejection. Remember how that allowed you to explore aspects of yourself more freely, to consider new perspectives, and to grow in ways that might not have been possible otherwise. This is the essence of Roger's approach, creating the conditions where people can reconnect with their inherent tendency toward growth and become more fully themselves. It's not about fixing what's broken, but about removing the obstacles to natural development and facilitating a person's own capacity for healing and self-discovery. This way of being with others stands in stark contrast to approaches that position the helper as an expert who diagnoses problems and prescribes solutions. Instead, it honors the wisdom that lives within each person and trusts in their ability to find their own answers when given the right supportive conditions. I want to pause here for a moment and ask you, when was the last time you felt truly heard and understood by another person? When did you last experience that sense of being accepted exactly as you are, without needing to perform or measure up to some expectation? I know how rare and precious these experiences can be, and how difficult it can sometimes feel to put into words the depth of our longing for authentic connection. Yet naming these experiences is often the first step toward transformation. I'd like to invite you to share in the comments below using the phrase, "I feel most connected to myself when," or "I struggle to be authentic when." Your words, however simple or complex, might be exactly what someone else needs to hear to feel less alone in their own experience. And the act of articulating your truth can itself be a powerful step toward greater authenticity. The community that forms in these shared reflections is part of what makes this space so meaningful. And now, continuing our exploration of Roger's approach to authentic living, Roger's concept of the true self versus the conditions of worth provides a powerful framework for understanding why so many of us struggle with authenticity. From our earliest days, we begin to receive messages about what makes us worthy of love and acceptance. These messages come from everywhere: our parents, teachers, peers, media, and broader culture. When a child expresses anger and is met with disapproval or punishment, they learn that this emotion is unacceptable. When they excel academically and receive praise and attention, they learn that their worth is tied to achievement. Over time, these experiences coalesce into what Rogers called conditions of worth, internalized standards that dictate which aspects of ourselves are acceptable and which must be hidden or denied. In response to these conditions, we develop what Rogers termed the ideal self, a version of who we think we should be to gain approval and avoid rejection. The greater the gap between this ideal self and our actual experiences, our real self, the more psychological distress we tend to feel. This disconnect leads to what Rogers described as incongruence, a state where our awareness doesn't match our experience. We might feel anger but smile politely, experience sadness but push forward with cheerful efficiency, or feel deeply inadequate while projecting confident competence. This gap between what we experience and what we allow into our awareness creates tension, anxiety, and a pervasive sense of not knowing who we truly are. It's like living with an internal critic that constantly monitors our thoughts, feelings, and behaviors, judging them against the conditions of worth we've internalized. The more stringent these conditions, the more aspects of ourselves we must deny or distort to maintain a sense of worthiness. The journey toward authenticity involves gradually recognizing these conditions of worth and beginning to question them. It means developing what Rogers called an internal locus of evaluation, learning to trust our own feelings and perceptions rather than constantly looking outside ourselves for validation and direction. This shift doesn't happen overnight, and it often requires the support of relationships where we experience the unconditional positive regard that was missing when these conditions formed. When we're accepted without judgment, we begin to extend that same acceptance toward parts of ourselves we've long rejected. This process isn't about becoming someone new, but rather about returning to a more natural way of being that honors all aspects of our experience. It's about reclaiming parts of ourselves that we've disowned in our effort to be acceptable and worthy of love. Imagine the freedom that comes with no longer needing to carefully monitor your every thought, word, and action against external standards of acceptability. Imagine the energy that becomes available when you're not constantly managing impressions and maintaining facades. This is the promise of Roger's approach. Not a perfect life free from struggle, but a more authentic one where you can be present with whatever arises, trusting in your inherent capacity to move toward growth and fulfillment when given the space to do so. One of the most transformative aspects of Rogers's approach is his understanding of empathy as a healing force. Empathy, in the Rogerian sense, goes far beyond merely understanding someone intellectually or feeling sympathy for their situation. It involves a deep, active process of entering into another person's perceptual world, seeing things as they see them, feeling things as they feel them, without losing sight of the as-if quality of this understanding. When someone truly receives this kind of empathy, they often experience a profound sense of relief and connection. It's as if they've been carrying a heavy burden alone, and suddenly someone is there to share the weight without taking it over or trying to fix it. This quality of presence creates a space where people can begin to explore their own experience more fully, often discovering aspects of themselves they hadn't previously recognized or accepted. Neuroscience now confirms what Rogers intuited decades ago, that being truly seen and understood by another person has measurable effects on our nervous system, helping to regulate our emotions and creating a sense of safety that allows for vulnerability and growth. When someone attunes to our emotional state, it helps us to name and organize our own experience, bringing clarity to what might otherwise feel like a confusing tangle of sensations and reactions. This kind of empathic understanding is not just something we receive from others. It's a quality we can develop toward ourselves, learning to approach our own thoughts, feelings, and behaviors with the same kind of curious, non-judgmental awareness that characterizes Roger's approach to others. Practicing self-empathy means developing the capacity to witness your own experience without immediately judging it or trying to change it. It's about creating an internal relationship characterized by the same qualities that Rogers identified as healing in external relationships: presence, acceptance, and understanding. When you make a mistake, rather than immediately launching into self-criticism, self-empathy allows you to acknowledge the disappointment while also recognizing the needs and values that drove your actions in the first place. This doesn't mean avoiding responsibility or growth. Paradoxically, it's when we fully accept where we are that we become most capable of moving forward. The pathway to change begins with acceptance of what is. Rogers observed this repeatedly in his therapeutic work, that when people stop fighting against their current reality and instead bring compassionate awareness to it, they naturally begin to shift and evolve. This principle applies equally to our relationship with ourselves. The parts of us that we reject or try to suppress don't simply disappear. Instead, they often exert influence outside our awareness or erupt in ways that seem beyond our control. By bringing these disowned aspects into the light of awareness and meeting them with understanding, rather than judgment, we begin to integrate them into a more cohesive, authentic sense of self. Rogers' concept of the fully functioning person provides a vision of psychological health that differs markedly from both popular culture's emphasis on achievement and traditional psychology's focus on symptom reduction. For Rogers, the fully functioning person isn't someone who has achieved some static state of perfection or who never experiences difficult emotions. Rather, it's someone who is engaged in an ongoing process of openness to experience, living existentially, fully in the present moment, and trusting in their organismic wisdom. Openness to experience means reducing our defensiveness and becoming increasingly able to listen to all the information available from our environment, from others, and from our own bodily sensations, emotions, and thoughts. It involves moving away from rigid categories of good, bad, right, wrong, and toward a more nuanced appreciation of the complexity of human experience. Living existentially refers to living fully in each moment, without distorting present experience to fit past patterns or future expectations. It means approaching each situation freshly, without prejudgment, and being willing to discover what each new experience has to teach us. Trusting in organismic wisdom means developing confidence in our own integrated, total reaction to situations, rather than relying solely on intellectual analysis or external authorities. It's about recognizing that our whole being, including our emotions, intuitions, and bodily responses, often contains wisdom that our conscious mind alone cannot access. This trust develops gradually as we learn to listen to ourselves more deeply and discover that our natural inclinations, when not distorted by conditions of worth, tend to guide us toward growth and fulfillment. The fully functioning person, according to Rogers, lives creatively and adaptively, able to respond flexibly to new situations rather than being bound by rigid patterns or expectations. They maintain a balance between stability and change, between independence and connection with others. Importantly, this isn't a state anyone achieves permanently, but rather a direction of movement, a process of becoming increasingly open, present, and self-trusting throughout life. Rogers himself emphasized that even in his later years, he continued to discover new aspects of himself and to evolve in his understanding and way of being in the world. This perspective offers a more compassionate and realistic vision of psychological health than models that suggest we should reach some final state of perfection or complete freedom from suffering. Instead, it honors the ongoing, ever-unfolding nature of human development and the inherent wisdom of our natural growth processes when they're allowed to operate freely. It suggests that our task isn't to achieve some ideal state, but to remove the obstacles to our natural development and to trust in our inherent capacity for growth and integration. One of the most powerful applications of Rogers' approach is in the realm of relationships. Whether in friendships, romantic partnerships, parent-child bonds, or professional connections, the core conditions he identified, unconditional positive regard, empathic understanding, and congruence, create an environment where genuine intimacy and growth become possible. When we can set aside our judgments and truly accept another person as they are, when we make the effort to understand their world from the inside rather than imposing our own perspective, and when we show up authentically rather than hiding behind roles or facades, something remarkable happens. The relationship becomes not just a source of comfort or practical support, but a context for mutual growth and discovery. Rogers observed that when these conditions are present, relationships tend to move toward greater honesty, deeper understanding, increased satisfaction, and more effective problem-solving. Each person feels safe enough to share their true thoughts and feelings, creating a cycle of increasing trust and openness. Conflicts, when they arise, become opportunities for deeper understanding rather than power struggles or occasions for withdrawal. The relationship itself becomes a creative process, evolving and developing in ways that couldn't have been predicted at the outset. This stands in stark contrast to relationships built on conditions, judgments, and the mutual maintenance of facades, which tend to become stagnant, unsatisfying, or fraught with unresolved tensions over time. Of course, creating relationships characterized by these qualities isn't always easy. It requires courage to set aside our judgments and truly listen to someone whose perspective differs from our own. It takes vulnerability to express our authentic thoughts and feelings rather than saying what we think will win approval. And it demands patience and practice to develop the kind of deep listening that leads to genuine empathic understanding. Yet the rewards of this approach are immense, not just in terms of the satisfaction and connection we experience, but in the way these qualities ripple outward, affecting other relationships and creating wider circles of understanding and acceptance. Rogers' vision extended beyond individual relationships to communities and societies, suggesting that these same conditions could transform our collective life if applied on a larger scale. He was actively involved in bringing his approach to education, healthcare, business, and even international conflict resolution, demonstrating its relevance beyond the therapy room. At a time when polarization and judgment seem increasingly prevalent in our public discourse, Rogers' emphasis on deep listening and genuine acceptance offers a powerful alternative, not as a way of avoiding necessary confrontation with injustice, but as a means of creating the conditions where real dialogue and understanding become possible. Rogers' approach to personal growth and change offers a refreshing alternative to strategies based on willpower, self-criticism, or rigid techniques. He observed that lasting change doesn't come from forcing ourselves into new patterns or striving to meet external ideals. Rather, it emerges naturally when we create certain conditions within ourselves and our environments. This perspective aligns with contemporary understandings of neuroplasticity, and habit formation, which suggests that sustainable change requires not just intellectual understanding or temporary effort, but the creation of new experiential pathways that gradually become our default ways of responding. The first step in this process is developing greater awareness of our current experience, learning to notice our thoughts, emotions, and bodily sensations without immediately judging them or trying to change them. This might involve practices like mindfulness meditation, journaling, or simply pausing throughout the day to check in with ourselves. As we become more aware, we often notice patterns in how we respond to certain situations or triggers, perhaps defaulting to people-pleasing when we feel insecure, becoming defensive when receiving feedback, or withdrawing when conflicts arise. The key is to observe these patterns with curiosity rather than criticism, understanding that they developed for good reasons, often as ways of protecting ourselves in environments where our authentic expression wasn't welcomed or safe. From this place of awareness and compassionate understanding, we can begin to experiment with new ways of responding, not by forcing change but by gently opening to alternatives and noticing what happens when we do. Rogers emphasized that growth occurs through a series of small, meaningful choices, rather than dramatic overhauls or rigid programs. Each time we choose slightly greater authenticity over performance, present-centered awareness over rumination about past or future, or trust in our internal sense of what feels right over external rules or expectations, we strengthen new neural pathways and create momentum toward change. This approach honors the wisdom of our resistance, rather than trying to override it through force of will. If part of us hesitates to change a particular pattern, that hesitation likely contains important information about what we're afraid might happen if we let go of familiar ways of being. By listening to these concerns with empathy and finding ways to address the underlying needs, we create the safety necessary for genuine transformation. Rogers found that when people experience the core conditions in therapy, in close relationships, or increasingly within themselves, they naturally move toward greater authenticity, flexibility, and fulfillment. The change process becomes less of a battle against oneself and more of an unfolding of potential that was present all along. This doesn't mean that growth is always comfortable or that it occurs at a steady pace. There may be periods of rapid change followed by integration, or times when we seem to revert to old patterns under stress. Yet the overall direction, when the right conditions are present, is toward greater wholeness and a more satisfying way of living. Rogers' insights about the conditions that facilitate growth have profound implications for how we approach raising and educating children. Traditional models often focus on molding children into what adults think they should be, using rewards and punishments, praise and criticism to shape behavior according to external standards. Rogers offered a radical alternative, creating an environment where children can develop according to their own inherent wisdom and potential. Research in developmental psychology has increasingly validated this approach, showing that children thrive when they experience the same core conditions that Rogers found essential for adult growth: genuine acceptance, empathic understanding, and authenticity from their caregivers and teachers. When children feel unconditionally valued, not for their achievements, appearance, or compliance, but simply for who they are, they develop a secure base from which to explore the world. They learn to trust their own perceptions, emotions, and interests rather than constantly looking outside themselves for validation and direction. This doesn't mean abandoning boundaries or guidance. Paradoxically, children who feel genuinely accepted are more likely to internalize healthy values and develop self-regulation than those who comply out of fear of punishment or withdrawal of love. When adults make the effort to truly understand a child's perspective, to enter their world and see things through their eyes, rather than imposing adult interpretations, children develop emotional intelligence and the capacity to understand themselves and others. And when adults relate to children with authenticity, rather than from behind a facade of perfect authority, children learn that it's safe to be real, to make mistakes, and to continue growing and learning throughout life. These principles apply equally in formal educational settings. Rogers was a pioneer in student-centered education, advocating for approaches that honor children's natural curiosity and capacity for self-directed learning. He recognized that meaningful learning involves not just the acquisition of information, but a change in the learner's sense of self and relationship to the world. This kind of learning can't be forced through standardized curricula or external incentives. It emerges when students feel safe enough to engage authentically with material that holds personal significance for them. Teachers who create these conditions don't abdicate their expertise or responsibility. Rather, they use their knowledge and experience to facilitate each student's unique learning journey, providing resources, feedback, and guidance tailored to individual needs and interests. The outcomes of this approach extend far beyond academic achievement to include greater creativity, intrinsic motivation, emotional well-being, and lifelong love of learning. In a rapidly changing world where the ability to adapt, think critically, and continue learning throughout life is increasingly essential, these qualities may be more valuable than any specific content knowledge. By focusing on creating the conditions where children's natural developmental wisdom can flourish, we prepare them not just for success by current standards, but for contributing to the creation of a more compassionate and creative future. While Rogers is often associated with individual therapy and personal growth, his vision extended to social and systemic change as well. He believed that the same principles that facilitate individual growth, acceptance, understanding, and authenticity, could transform organizations, communities, and even international relations. In the latter part of his career, Rogers was actively involved in facilitating dialogue across severe cultural, political, and ideological divides, bringing together groups in conflict for intensive encounter experiences. He worked with educators, healthcare providers, business leaders, and policymakers to create more person-centered systems and institutions. What makes Rogers' approach to social change distinctive is its focus on process rather than predetermined outcomes. Instead of imposing solutions from above, he advocated creating the conditions where people could come together in authentic dialogue, developing greater mutual understanding, and discovering their own paths forward. This approach honors the complexity of social issues and the wisdom distributed throughout a community, rather than concentrating power in the hands of experts or authorities. It recognizes that lasting change emerges from transformed relationships and ways of being together rather than merely from new policies or structures. In contemporary terms, we might describe this as a complex adaptive systems approach to change, understanding that when we alter the quality of interactions within a system, new patterns and possibilities naturally emerge that couldn't have been predicted or engineered in advance. This perspective offers a hopeful alternative to both revolutionary approaches that seek to impose change through force and conservative approaches that resist necessary evolution. Rogers' faith in human potential extended beyond the individual to a belief in our collective capacity to create more humane and life-affirming ways of living together. He saw evidence for this in the natural movement toward greater authenticity, understanding, and cooperation that he observed when people came together under the right conditions. While he was not naive about the challenges facing humanity, writing during the Cold War era, with its threat of nuclear annihilation, and witnessing many forms of oppression and injustice, he maintained what he called cautious optimism about our future. This hope was not based on ignoring problems or wishing them away, but on his direct experience of the transformative power of authentic human connection. Today, as we face significant collective challenges, from climate change to political polarization, from growing inequality to the implications of artificial intelligence, Rogers' approach offers valuable guidance. It suggests that addressing these issues effectively requires not just technical solutions, but a transformation in how we relate to ourselves, each other, and the natural world. It invites us to create spaces where diverse perspectives can be heard with genuine openness, where we can acknowledge the complexity of our problems without retreating into oversimplification or despair, and where new possibilities can emerge from our collective wisdom, rather than being imposed by those with the most power. Most fundamentally, it reminds us that our humanity, our capacity for empathy, creativity, and cooperation, is not separate from our approach to these challenges, but central to addressing them in ways that enhance rather than diminish life. Throughout this exploration of Rogers' approach, we've touched on several key practices that can help us move toward greater authenticity and fulfillment. Let's bring these together as practical steps you can incorporate into your daily life, remembering that this is not a linear process.